the United States may have feared the dreaded Hells Angels, but over the last 2 decades, Russia has groomed its own feared motorcycle club, the Noshnaya Volki, or the Night Wolves. With clubs all over Europe and running a mini conglomerate of 60 different businesses, the Night Wolves may not be as widely dispersed as the Hells Angels, but with their ties directly to Vladimir Putin and taking part in the attempted assassination of Montenegro's president, what they lack in size compared to the Angels, they make up for in ambition. But who are these feared Russian bikers, and are they really nothing more than another tool of the Russian government as it wages a new generation of asymmetrical warfare against its neighbors? The Night Wolves began as a group of metalheads in the early 1980s who mixed their love of Western heavy metal with motorcycles, quickly organizing illegal rock concerts in Soviet Union-era Moscow. The group became the bane of Soviet police forces until changes brought on by perestroika, or the backing off from centralized economic planning by the Communist Soviets, allowed the group to form as Russia's first official motorcycle club in 1989. Alexander Zoldystanov, the group's founder, was a former dental surgeon who modeled the group after America's Hells Angels, going so far as to translate the Hells Angels rulebook into Russian and adopting it fully, while also making sure all members rode American Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Delving into the criminal underground, the Night Wolves also displayed a hard nationalistic streak, and when in August 1991 hardline communists sent tanks to try to topple Gorbachev's government, the Night Wolves manned barricades that helped secure the Russian parliament. For their efforts, Gorbachev awarded Zoldystanov a medal and began a close relationship between the Russian government and the outlaw motorcycle gang that lasts to this day. With the fall of the Soviet Union and the adoption of free market ideologies in Russia, the Night Wolves quickly expanded their operations and opened a club called the Sexton in Moscow, modeled after a club with the same name in West Germany, in which Zoldystanov had worked as a bouncer. They also launched the Wolfwear clothing line and a tattoo parlor and biker shop, while also starting to offer their services to local Russian rock bands as security. Following the Hells Angels playbook, page by page, the Night Wolves quickly began offering security services and protection for businesses, trying to avoid shakedowns from corrupt local police and other gangsters, eventually running their own protection racket. Business owners faced a simple choice: pay the Night Wolves to protect you from corrupt police and gangsters, or be at the mercy of these corrupt police and gangsters, as well as the Night Wolves themselves. Starting in the early 2000s, however, Zoldystanov began to transform the group, ditching many of their ties to Western organizations and traditions based on Western motorcycle clubs, such as the Hells Angels. Their transformation saw them become staunchly anti-Western and adopt a hardline nationalistic ideology that promoted extreme Russian patriotism. At the same time, they adopted strong ties with the Russian Orthodox Church, even sponsoring motorcycle pilgrimages to Orthodox holy sites and using the imagery of a 14th century Orthodox monk named Alexander Parisviet. Parisviet had died fighting against a Mongol invasion, and his death turned him into a martyr that inspired a much smaller force to defeat a large Mongol army in a later battle. Parisviet's death turned him into a powerful figure for Russian nationalists, and is seen as having helped throw off the yoke of Mongol rule for what would become modern Russia. The Night Wolves' deepening ties with the Russian Orthodox Church helped pave the way to close ties with the Kremlin, as the current leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, otherwise known as Vladimir M. Gundyaev, was exposed as cooperating with the KGB by former KGB defectors. We're sure that the head of the largest religious group in Russia being a former Russian intelligence asset is a complete coincidence, however, and not an obvious attempt to manipulate Russia's religious people. Whatever the case, the Night Wolves found themselves growing increasingly closer to the Russian government, with the motorcycle club participating in a rally to commemorate the election of Dmitry Medvedev as Russia's president, with Vladimir Putin conveniently named prime minister. Putin would go on to ride with the Night Wolves at motorcycle rallies in Sevastopol and Novorossiysk in 2010 and 2011, although Putin would use a 3-wheeled Harley trike with neon lighting, which the world's motorcycle fans immediately pointed out was hardly badass. For a man who regularly takes shirtless pictures of himself horseback riding and shooting guns, the image of himself on a neon-lit tricycle definitely missed the mark on badassery. However, Putin's grooming of the Night Wolves as an extension of the Russian government began in earnest during these public ride-alongs, with Putin publicly thanking Zoldystanov for his service to Russia. In 2013, Putin would go on to award him the Order of Honor medal for his efforts in youth patriotic education and for honoring the memory of the fallen from the Great Patriotic War, or World War II, as it's known to the rest of the world. If the words youth patriotic education make you feel a twinge of revulsion and fear, then that's probably because you don't live in a third world dictatorship. The Night Wolves Wolves' form of patriotism proved to be just as toxic as any tin-pot dictator's brand, with their education to the youth involving the rejection of Western culture, despite proudly riding American Harley-Davidson motorcycles, strong anti-feminist views, and violent, hateful gay propaganda. The deepening ties between the Kremlin and the Nightwolves were made all the more obvious when Zaldostanov was chosen as a torchbearer at the 2014 Sochi Olympics. Because if there's any place in the world where a violent criminal leader is honored by carrying the Olympic torch, it's in Putin's version of Russia. The Nightwolves flag was also carried aloft to the International Space Station, where it was proudly displayed in the Russian section of the ISS. While spaceflight is supposed to signify the best of humanity, Putin decided that Russia's contribution would be to proudly display the flag of a criminal organization in humanity's shared space habitat, a move that drew no small amount of protest from the Russian scientists and science enthusiasts. With the Kremlin's backing, though, the group has grown to over 7,000 members and is spread to over 50 chapters throughout Russia and Eastern Europe. They've also expanded their services into businesses that range from clothing to security services and even paramilitary training, while holding and organizing patriotic rallies and entertainment, which are broadcast on Russian television. Yet, for the more oblivious amongst us, that question remains: are they really Kremlin agents? Outmatched military and economically by its major competitors, Russia has recently adopted the doctrine of New Generation Warfare, or as it's known in the West, non-linear warfare. This new military doctrine mandates the use of non-governmental organizations in a direct military or quasi-military support role, while still maintaining the ability for the Kremlin to deny that their actions are directly sanctioned. The group's first major operation as Kremlin agents began during Russia's annexation of Crimea, during which the group was active a full week before the arrival of Russian special forces. They helped organize and man roadblocks and checkpoints, distributed propaganda, collected intelligence, distributed weapons, and organized protests and civilian self-defense units, all with the intent of supporting Russian military action against the Ukraine military. They were also active in intimidating local Ukrainian government officials and even captured and detained Ukrainian military officers. After the arrival of Russian special forces, they participated in a raid on a Ukrainian naval base in Sevastopol and the takeover of a natural gas distribution facility. They were also directly observed carrying automatic weapons of military caliber and participating in joint operations with Russian Spetsnaz units during March of 2014. After the successful annexation of Crimea, Zaldostanov and 10 other members were awarded the official military campaign medal for the takeover, a move which makes it a bit difficult to believe the Russian government wasn't directly sponsoring and ordering their activities. Since the initial campaign, though, the group has continued to carry out the Russian government's orders, being awarded a contract by the Russian-occupied city of Bakhchisarai in Crimea to provide youth patriotic education, which is code speak for Russian patriotic brainwashing with threats of violence. They also used their local chapters and social media platforms as a front across Eastern Europe to recruit fighters to serve in pro-Russian militias, and have even fought and died alongside these militias. Members of the Nightwolves are even being used by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Luhansk People's Republic to provide police and security services, to include securing critical infrastructure. The Nightwolves also routinely produce patriotic festivals and television productions under the official guise of youth patriotic education. These productions are broadcast on Russian television and often feature blatantly anti-Western, especially anti-American themes, with heroic Russian figures pitted in battle against corrupt and degenerate Western antagonists. In one such production, which was broadcast to millions of Russians on television, a character that looks exactly like the Statue of Liberty attempts to kidnap the Snow Princess Snegorochka, a popular character in Russian fairy tales, only to be thwarted by the Nightwolves. Reminiscent of Stalin's propaganda, the Nightwolves have also adopted strong Soviet values and ideology, even promoting Stalin as a national hero, a move which doesn't sit well with elder Russians who still remember Stalin's purges and the mass murder of millions of Russian civilians. In 2015, the Nightwolves were assigned a new tasking by their Kremlin bosses, with the creation of a Russian anti-Maidan movement, the intent of which is to prevent the reoccurrence of the famed color revolutions that brought down the Soviet Union. Championing individual rights and democratic values, the color revolution weakened the Soviet Union's hold on its satellite states, and a modern and increasingly authoritarian Russia sees the potential for a new revolution as fatal to its ambitions to remain in power. Thus, the Nightwolves were tasked with protecting from any such potential revolution, with the express instructions to show resistance to the global Satanism, the growing savagery of Western Europe, the rush to consumerism that denies all spirituality, the destruction of traditional values. All this homosexual talk, this American democracy, as stated by Zaldistanov himself. The Kremlin, however, is far from satisfied using the Nightwolves in Crimea or at home, and in 2018 organized a Nightwolves tour through the Balkans, a region which Russia is very eager to reclaim for itself after losing control after the fall of the Soviet Union. They specifically targeted the Serb-dominated region of Republika Srpska, a breakaway region that covers about half of Bosnia-Herzegovina and wants to secede. While the US and NATO oppose secession as they consider it a threat to the stability of Bosnia and could plunge the region into a new and catastrophic war even larger than its previous conflict in 1992, Russia openly endorses secession as it views it as a chance to reclaim some of its lost potential influence in the region. Russia continues to deny any official link between its government and the military and the Nightwolves. Yet in 2016, during its attempt to overthrow the government of Montenegro due to its ambitions to join NATO, Nightwolves members were implicated and indicted in a plan to assassinate its prime minister. Today, the Nightwolves continue to spread across Eastern Europe, though in 2018 the Slovakian government banned the creation of new Nightwolves clubs in its country, with a Slovak intelligence officer commenting, "At the height of the Cold War, the USSR threatened to overrun Europe with thousands of massed tanks and millions of mechanized infantrymen. The best Moscow can do now is send a bunch of overweight, middle-aged bikers on Harleys to try to intimidate us." The officer, who wished to remain anonymous, went on to say, "Russia still poses a threat to Eastern Europe, but the Nightwolves are posers who are playing at being special forces. In a conflict, NATO would make short work of Nightwolves. They are a myth, promoted by Moscow to compensate for the power that it no longer has." In the end, there's little doubt that the Nightwolves are an arm of the Russian government, another tool in their new generation warfare that allows Russia to try to influence countries it can no longer militarily challenge, spouting extremist nationalistic views and vitriolic hate speech against feminists and gays. The Nightwolves claim to be staunch Russian patriots who place the motherland above all else and reject the inferior democracies of the West. And yet, the fact remains that the majority of its members still ride American Harley-Davidson motorcycles. If you thought this story was interesting, check out our other video, Dark Web's Silk Road website, Double Lifetime in Prison. What happened?